This week, a look at electoral politics in Florida as Republicans and Democrats plan their strategies for a busy year at the polls. And the regularly scheduled legislative session comes to a close, but lawmakers will need to return to Tallahassee to pass a budget. This is Talking Central Florida. Hello, I'm Steve Mort, and welcome to the show where we take a closer look at the news in your region and community. In the coming months, we're going to be looking in depth at many of the key decisions facing voters this year. It's part of the News Collaborative of Central Florida's work to bring together the reporting of partner outlets in a consequential year of elections. But this week, we're going to set the table by taking a quick look at the lay of the land in Florida when it comes to electoral politics in 2026. To help us do that, I talked with Kimberly Leonard, author of the Florida Playbook for Politico. I started by asking her whether Democrats can mount a serious challenge in Florida this year, given their voter registration disadvantage.
It's at about 1.5 million, but it's still growing. Republicans are really looking to flip certain blue counties even before the election, like Palm Beach County is a big one that's sort of in their sights. Democrats still seem a little bit, doom and gloom, I would say. However, they definitely are looking at certain seats where they think they might have a chance. And they're looking at folks like Alex Vindman, who is running for U.S. Senate, who raked in $1.7 million during his first day of fundraising, which was a significant amount of money. So even if he doesn't win, they see potentially people like him as being able to help them, bring in more energy, bring in more cash. They're desperately trying to get the national DNC to invest in Florida, and they keep saying that they will, but I have yet to see, those numbers come in. Having said that, we're still far away from the August primary, and so we could even see some others get into the race. There's still no major candidate for agriculture commissioner or chief financial officer. So really, I would say that there are key House races to watch. And on top of that, probably more looking down through the legislature, and maybe the Democrats might be able to no longer be overcome by a Republican supermajority.
How much might Democrats' strength this year, do you think, be determined by concern amongst Venezuelans and Cubans over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown? And do you think that U.S. intervention in Venezuela and possibly Cuba might make a difference?
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I think that there have been a lot of people who were very concerned, and you can see that by the way that Republicans are even acting regarding, canceling TPS for Venezuelans, regarding mass deportations, Alligator Alcatraz detention center. You really see even a lot of Republicans speak out about it who are down here in Miami. And so that has really caused a lot of backlash. It's caused people to worry about, what might happen to their families. And they just feel that they were misled in terms of understanding that Trump's immigration policy would be rooted more toward looking at, those who had also committed serious crimes versus anybody who was undocumented. And so the mayor of Miami, who was elected down here, the city of Miami, she thinks that immigration played a very big part in her getting elected to be, the first Democrat in 30 years to be elected. But all that doesn't really occur in isolation, because on the one hand, you have the deportation tactics, but on the other hand, you have people celebrating in the streets about Maduro being arrested. And so that has been received very positively. Obviously, there's a lot of consternation about what might come next. And if things really go south, that could also have an impact. But the idea of Maduro being out of office, the idea that Cuba could be next for a lot of people, we've seen a lot of demonstrations after the strikes in Iran down here in Miami. There were people who were demonstrating to say that they wanted Cuba to be next. So it's just very interesting to see how these policies are being received, in South Florida or in other parts of Florida versus in the rest of the country. It's very distinct.
Let's talk about redistricting. The governor's called a special session in late April to tackle redistricting. Could that be, do you think, a cause for concern from Democrats? Do they think it's a cause for concern, and particularly in places like Darren Soto's congressional district, Orange and Osceola counties, which has, a large Hispanic population, and which the GOP has been looking to target to flip for some time.
So actually, this is more mixed, I would say, because we don't know what the maps are going to look like. You actually have some Republicans who are even concerned about what might happen. Look, they've already been advantaged, the maps are already heavily advantaged to Republicans, right? And so once you start redrawing some of these boundaries, you risk then changing the calculus for other people. And so I don't know what the maps look like right now, but I wouldn't say that there's an automatic assumption that it's going to benefit Republicans when it's all said and done. So the governor has said that he wants to wait on the Supreme Court decision, which, we may not have by the end of April. And so I think once we kind of know what those maps look like, we'll get a better sense of that. The one that DeSantis has explicitly called out is District 20 with Sheila Shervillis-McCormick. And that has a very active primary right now. And it's heavily Democratic, but that's the main one where the governor has said that he thinks that one is ripe for redrawing.
Well, talking about Republicans then, do you get a sense of how GOP leaders in Florida are honing their strategy and messaging in Florida this midterm, with Democrats feeling somewhat energized? Do the Republicans have a strategy to try to push back?
I mean, the strategy that those in Congress are going for is really to try to point out that they extended the tax cuts. It's a difficult message because what they're essentially saying is, look, we know everything's expensive, but they would have been a lot worse had we not extended the Trump tax cuts. Now, it's true. People would have been paying higher taxes pretty much across the board. However, it's much more potent often in politics to talk about things that people have lost versus what they could have lost or what they gained even. And so for Democrats to go around saying, hey, you can't afford housing, you can't afford property insurance, you can't afford groceries, you lost your health care, that can be, very, very salient. And so I think it will be very salient across the state. However, going back to kind of the initial topic with this conversation, you have so many more Republicans in the state of Florida, 1.5 million now. There are going to be even more by November. And so that makes it so difficult when so many people just vote, party line. And so the question is, how much can Democrats bring along a lot of those no party affiliated voters who have leaned right in past elections? And the question is, can they get more left leaning out to vote in a way that would really make a difference for them in some key races?
Well, you may have already answered this next question then. That's on the gubernatorial race. And, there are currently, I think, more than 40 candidates vying to succeed Governor DeSantis. How do you see that battle shaping up? I mean, do Democrats really have much of a chance? The governor certainly seemed to have a stranglehold on that office, while he was there. Seems like a tall order, doesn't it, for Democrats?
Well, so here's the thing. Byron Donalds, who is a congressman and is the Trump endorsed candidate, is so far ahead of anyone else in the race. And, he, as of the end of the year, he had already raised $45 million. And just to make it clear, that's a lot of money to raise for a governor's race, especially in a state, that's considered more safe. And then, so even for anyone on the Republican side to try to beat him is going to be really, really hard. The polling shows that he's way ahead. He also has a top-notch team around him, some of the same people that helped orchestrate Trump's return to the White House. So that really makes it, again, people who are really experienced, who aren't afraid to, be really, really tough, who know a lot of national players and all these other things. So that's where it's difficult for any Republicans. The Democrats on their side, if you look at polling, it does look like they might be able to get, fairly close to Donald's. Maybe, single digits even is where they could end up. However, being able to compete toe to toe is, you'd almost have to have a lot more go incredibly wrong for Republicans and wrong for Trump. And so it just, trying to make up that difference is very, very difficult. Not saying it can't be done. I don't, it's so early at this point. But, on the one hand, you have David Jolly, who is a former Republican congressman, and maybe that helps to bring in more, NPAs, even disaffected Republicans. And then you have Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings, who has a really long background in law enforcement. And so branding these two as kind of far left, as what Republicans have tried to do with Democrats in the past, is going to be a lot harder. That is still how they're going to message them, right? And how they are messaging them. But it does create a little bit more of a challenge in terms of, trying to kind of make them the boogeyman.
Well, does Governor DeSantis have any say in that? Are endorsements going to be important? We just saw the Volusia County Sheriff endorse the Lieutenant Governor, for example. Or does Trump's endorsement pretty much still trump all, do you think?
I can tell you that talking to grassroots around Florida, they're very concerned about why the governor won't endorse Byron Donalds. And they really want to hear from him. Now, grassroots Republicans are, people who volunteer for the party. They're very devoted. They're not like your average GOP voter. But I do think that it would make a difference. Not necessarily surpassing Trump, but I do think that people would, if he were to endorse Paul Renner, who's the former House Speaker, or Jay Collins, who is his lieutenant governor, I do think that would cause people to look twice. It might change what donors decide to do as well. If Casey DeSantis gets into the race, that even makes kind of an interesting ballot box question, because you will have a lot of people who will go to vote who won't necessarily make the connection that it's not Ron DeSantis on their ballot. They might just see DeSantis and then cast their ballot that way. And I don't know what she's going to do. She has a while to decide still. And so Trump's endorsement has been shown to be very, very powerful, but I do think that there would be a lot of curiosity and eyeballs around DeSantis if he were to do something. I just don't know that he will, because he has his own political future to think about, right? We don't know what he's doing next. He's term limited out. And so for him to cross President Trump, when by all accounts they have a really good relationship right now, just seems like not the best move for his own future.
Well, we'll put notes to Kimberly's reporting in the podcast feed show notes. Meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to Talking Central Florida. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and watch on YouTube at Talking Central Florida. Next, let's keep talking politics with two reporters here in Central Florida, Skyler Swisher from the Orlando Sentinel and Jeff Allen from Spectrum News 13. Thanks so much for coming in, guys.
Good to be here.
Appreciate it. Good to see you. We're going to talk about the legislative session in this segment. Lawmakers passed several significant bills on elections, DEI, data centers, emergency spending, and funding for HIV/AIDS medication, but they failed to pass a budget or move forward on property tax change as a priority. For Governor DeSantis, he'd also wanted an AI Bill of Rights and had pushed lawmakers to advance his administration's efforts to limit vaccine mandates. He didn't get either. A fetal personhood bill and an expansion of e-verify requirements also failed. So let's start by going through some of the bills that are going to the governor for his signature. And first, let's stay with elections, Jeff, while we're talking about them. The legislature passed a sweeping elections bill, adding tough new proof of citizenship requirements. Spectrum News has covered this legislation that seems to be modeled right after the federal Save America Act that President Trump has backed. What's this state law going to mean for voters in Florida?
Yeah, some is modeled by that overall federal law and that initiative that they would like to pass at the federal level. But here in Florida, this will actually end the ability for students at our local colleges and universities to use their student IDs as a verification for voting. If a student has a real ID, if they're have that driver's license with that, they're okay. Yeah. But the worry is by critics of this is that it will eliminate the ability for students to be able to go in and vote. And as far as outlawing the vote by mail, they did not go as far as the federal plans do with that. It continues vote by mail. That's still going to be possible. But, DeSantis will likely sign this, but this will not go into effect until next year. So January 1 of 1997. So this won't be in play for those all important midterms later this year. But again, critics say it's just, it's they don't like the fact that it takes away that student ID and that they believe it will disenfranchise some voters.
It's interesting, isn't it? It just says that identifications issued by educational institutions cannot be used to prove your identity. This isn't to register to vote, right? This is just to prove your identity once you get to the polls.
Correct. So the worry by critics of this is that, they won't be able to vote there on the election day or the primary day, and it'll stop them from making their vote count because they'll just kind of either let them vote, or if they find out afterward, that vote might get tossed out. So it's just that all important election day. Of course, remember here in Central Florida, there were some long lines, especially at UCF in the last last major election, and so you already had those issues, and then they're worried that this might inhibit those students from
maybe
making their vote.
suppress that turnout amongst younger voters.
Yeah.
Your colleague Annie Martin Skyler's written about another key bill that's going to the governor. This one creates a process that would allow the state to designate groups as terrorist, domestic terrorist organizations. Just help us understand what that process would look like.
Yeah, so first off, the definition of terrorism is a violent act that's dangerous to human life with the intent to intimidate the civilian population or influence government policy. So the FDLE commissioner, that's the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, would designate a group a terrorist organization. It then would go to the Florida cabinet that would vote to approve that designation. If they vote to approve it, then you have a variety of penalties that could kick in. So, if there's material support for the terrorist organization, you could see criminal penalties. If it's a university, for instance, they could have funding withheld. If it's a student that is, supporting the so-called terrorist organization, they could be expelled, or they could face out-of-state tuition. Voucher schools could be blacklisted and not be eligible to receive public funding.
Yeah, this one has received a lot of pushback, right, Jeff, from Islamic groups and others.
Yeah, basically what they're kind of targeting here, the Sharia law, it's from the Quran. It's a legal system that guides Muslims in their way of life. And DeSantis, the governor, the state attorney general, Uthmeyer, and statewide Republicans are linking Sharia law with what they say is a threat of, possible terrorist attacks or basically support of potential terrorism. And so that's why they're going after this. And in fact, Jacksonville Republican Angie Nixon, she says that, this is an abuse of power. It's even comparing it to the KKK and their actions. ACLU has come out against this. They're saying it's a violation of First Amendment rights. Several other groups just say that this is an overreach and going way too far.
There is the ability to appeal to the Leon court district, but still, there's criticism that's just concentrating too much power in too few hands.
Let's talk about DEI. This was another of the more contentious bills that made it over the finish line this session. That's an effort to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion in local governments. This one could have a direct impact in Central Florida, I guess. Local governments have sponsored diversity and pride events throughout our region. What's the mechanism, Skyler, for preventing that now going forward?
Well, if you're a local elected official, you could be removed from office if you're viewed as violating this statute.
And the governor has exercised that power
very
quite a bit
so.
over the course of his
very much so.
time.
So, they could basically have kind of an axe hanging over their head if they were to do anything that's perceived as promoting DEI. There's also a provision in the law that would allow for a private lawsuit. Where somebody could be, eligible to receive damages if it's deemed that this new law has been violated.
Yeah, and we have seen that trend as well, where members of the public are empowered to bring lawsuits, and some of the enforcement is put into the hands of the public. There's been criticism, hasn't there, Jeff, including from some Central Florida lawmakers on this one. You guys at Political Connections from Spectrum News have covered this debate on this. What have you guys been hearing?
Well, this is really interesting because we've seen the efforts to crack down on DEI already at the federal and state levels. But, when you look at Central Florida, for example, a pride parade that we see go down the streets of downtown Orlando, you have local representatives like Maxwell Frost. You have Mayor Buddy Dyer, those people actually in those parades. This could actually, like you said, Skyler, this could actually put them in jeopardy of losing their job if they're seen in that parade, even just supporting this. Of course, the city sometimes also, may financially support certain things, even if it's just them being in that parade and the cost of, going down there. So when you look at that really kind of puts that cloud over them, and all these leaders are going to be questioning whether or not they're able to even do these things. It allows residents even to sue, to file a lawsuit against their local governments on behalf of this new bill if they feel like that their leaders are supporting these efforts, either financially or just in vocal support even. So it's really unclear exactly where this will land in the courts, but it really moves the crackdown on DEI a lot further.
Let's talk about emergency spending. You wrote a fair bit about Alligator Alcatraz last year when that facility was being stood up, Skyler. That's the state immigration detention facility, of course, in the Everglades, which drew a lot of attention to the governor's emergency spending powers. that he used to get that thing up and running. Lawmakers did replenish the governor's emergency spending fund, but there's now going to be more oversight.
That's right. And one of the things that we've seen is that the governor will declare an emergency that just keeps getting extended. So it's kind of like this perpetual state of emergency. So there's going to be a new provision that if it is extended beyond the 60-day, initial term, the legislature's budget leaders will be able to review that, and they'll have to, give approval, or they could block further spending if they deem it as being unnecessary. And there's also going to be a quarterly review of spending. So they'll be looking over and reviewing exactly where this money is going.
Yeah, and there has been questions over the federal reimbursement of all the money that the state has spent on that facility. There was a moment of bipartisanship among lawmakers around funding for HIV/AIDS medication. Spectrum News has done some preview reporting on this issue, Jeff. So just first off, give us some background on why supporters say this bill was needed.
Yeah, well, the Florida Department of Health, they actually offer assistance to people HIV positive throughout the state through the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, or ADAP. The Florida Department of Health actually says it was going to be out about $120 million to continue that assistance as it's currently set up. In fact, if you go to their website, they have a notice on there that basically says they're reducing the threshold of assistance in this. So it used to be about I think 130%, or it's actually now going to be about 130% of the poverty level. So whereas you might have somebody who makes about $60,000 a year, HIV positive, they would be eligible for assistance through this program. Now it's going to be down to somebody who makes about $20,000, which in Central Florida, if you do the math, I mean, we know how much things cost. That's a pretty low threshold for getting assistance in this. So a lot of people are going to be cut off from help they had before through these medications, different drugs that help folks who are HIV positive.
And of course, in our region, we have one of the largest number of HIV/AIDS patients in the state.
Yes, and you have to factor these ACA subsidies, these enhanced subsidies that went away at the start of this year. And so that's another factor of why Florida is saying we can't continue this, because either through the ACA subsidies, those premiums going up, and also the removal of that Ryan White funding. So.
What happens now, Skyler, with this?
Well, the legislature did come up with a $31 million infusion to continue funding these programs through June 30th. And there does seem that there's somewhat of a consensus to put this in the budget for next fiscal year to kind of plug some of these shortfalls in HIV funding.
Well, you can find links in the show notes to a couple of roundups of the session, which detail several of the bills we've been talking about, plus many others that we don't have time to get to here, including new rules for teachers' unions, for example. You'll find it all in the podcast feed show notes. A reminder, you can support Talking Central Florida by clicking like and subscribe. We're at Talking Central Florida on Facebook and Instagram. Lots of things didn't get done in the regularly scheduled session, of course, chief among them the budget. As we mentioned earlier with Kimberly Leonard, there's already set to be a special session in late April to look at redistricting, but lawmakers have to come back before that to get the budget done. There's some déjà vu, isn't there, here, Jeff? I wonder why lawmakers were unable to come to an agreement this time on the budget.
Yeah, here we go again. We have about a $1.4 billion separation between the Senate and House budgets here, which in the grand scheme of things, I mean, you have over $100 million or $100 billion over on the budget.
Yeah.
So, not as big as it sounds if you just say $1.4 billion, but still they are disagreeing on several things here. And you have, a few $100 million here and there. For example, the Senate, they want 3% pay raises for state workers across the board, but the House only wants those raises for law enforcement and prison guards. So they're disagreeing on how far those pay raises should go. The Senate wants more money for affordable housing. The House not as much money in that. And the House also wants $300 million more for schools, K through 12, than the Senate does. So, it's kind of almost death by a thousand cuts here. There's disagreements on the money values on several things, and they just can't seem to get together. There seems to be a little bit of just animosity even towards members of the House and Senate. We saw it last year where they couldn't agree on property taxes, and they're still really I don't know. I don't know if it's bad blood or what you want to call it there, but they don't seem to be seeing eye to eye.
I mean, it might just be a small amount, but the disagreement over those allocations is still pretty deep and could take some time to resolve. I mean, the Sentinel's reported on some of that distrust, right, between the House and the Senate leaderships. Your reporter in Tallahassee, Jeffrey Schweers, has been over that. Does some of that stem from last year's showdown over the budget, and what do you guys see as having been the main sticking points this time around?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, you can just kind of look at the difference where the House has the leaner budget. The Senate's at $115 billion, the House is at $113.6 billion. Jeff mentioned the state worker raises, where Senate's 3% across the board. The House is more targeted. Senate President Al Britton has been, struggling rural communities are kind of a priority for him. Yeah. That's been a bit of a sticking point.
He didn't get a lot of what he wanted through on rural development.
Exactly. And then there's the, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but the whole property tax issue. What are we going to do with property taxes? Doesn't seem like the legislature's on the same page with that as well.
I mean, while we look at all this palace intrigue, there are stakes, of course, for people here in Central Florida. Just sort of talk about that, Jeff, and what it means for our region. I mean, you've reported, for example, on school leaders' push for funding in this budget. I mean, we know that the Orange County School Board just elected to close 7 schools. Funding's a real issue.
Yeah, they are just hemorrhaging students. They're having thousands and thousands of loss of student enrollment, which of course means a less funding for them. So they actually went to Tallahassee. Several of the Orange County School Board members made a trip up there right in smack in the middle of the legislative session, just really trying to talk to lawmakers and urge them to secure and maintain that enough funding for public schools, because what they say is happening is they're basically still having to facilitate a lot of things like the public schools actually facilitate the homeschool program, even though the students are being homeschooled. So they're still having to spend money on a lot of this facilitation of education, even if it doesn't ultimately bring them in funding, because they only get that funding if that student is sitting in an Orange County public school classroom. And so they're really urging the legislature to maintain that funding as that those private school choice vouchers have really taken a lot of that away from them.
That brings us neatly on to property taxes, as you mentioned just now, Skyler, so I'll come to you first on that. You reported last year on the governor's push to eliminate property taxes, certainly reduce them. He wants lawmakers to put a measure on the ballot this year for voters. That didn't get over the line. It's going to require a special session now to get that done in time for November. Just remind us, first off, what the governor's looking for here.
So his position has somewhat evolved over time, I would say. Initially, he just said he wanted to just abolish property taxes.
Yeah.
And I remember we were asking, well, what do you mean by that? Are you talking about just do away with property taxes entirely? And they didn't really provide specifics. I don't think they've ever really given a written plan to the media or to the legislature. So it seems like where we've landed now and what the governor is supportive of would be eliminating property taxes on homesteaded primary residences, and these would be non-school property taxes, with some sort of mechanism in place to preserve funding for first responders, firefighters, law enforcement.
I mean, it seems like there just wasn't this time around in a very crowded session the bandwidth really to get something this complex over the finish line. I mean, we know that there was a House Select Committee last session that spent some time looking into this, but this is an incredibly complex issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's $15 to $18 billion of revenue. I mean, and this is the revenue that powers your local community, right? These are your parks, your libraries, your public service. So it's a very complicated issue that could have lasting ramifications on the state of Florida. So it's easy to go on Fox News and say, hey, I don't like property taxes. Let's just get rid of them. But when you really start looking at the numbers, it's a very complicated issue. I mean, the Senate has been a little bit less eager to eliminate property taxes. And he said it's not, Senate President Al Britton said it's not simple math. This is trigonometry we're talking about.
I mean, I guess property tax reform, these proposals at least, have been put forward in response to this affordability crunch that we keep hearing about. Critics say it'll, as you say, put local governments in a bind when it comes to their budgets, but there are effects that could be felt well beyond that, and I think you've looked into some of those.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Whereas the local governments could suffer from a lack of revenue. I jumped into the real estate world and kind of looked at what this would mean for real estate from home buyers and home sellers, and they actually kind of see this as a plus if it does go through. Of course, we don't know what level of property tax relief homeowners will get, but it could actually elevate those home prices in a time where we're seeing some of those cool off. The real estate world, it's cooled off a bit here in Central Florida from where it was just kind of skyrocketing with the appraisal of homes a few years ago. But they say this could actually raise the value of homes, because the idea is if you don't have, if a home buyer, home seller, really either one, doesn't see those maybe thousands of dollars that they won't have to pay now in taxes, or at least a part of that, it actually elevates the home, and it kind of makes people more eager to maybe buy a home that they normally would say, oh, well, we got, we're going to have $10,000 maybe of taxes on that home or something. So
yeah. Before we move on, I just want to stay with housing a moment, and another proposed bill that we should mention that Spectrum News has covered and that lawmakers didn't succeed in passing the session, and that's HOA reform. What had been envisaged there, and do we think this proposal might resurface again next session?
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this because we've all heard those HOA horror stories, and we've also heard some cases where it's gone into the courts and just, people have lost, collectively these neighborhoods have lost just hundreds of thousands of dollars even in some cases. This one didn't quite get over the finish line. It basically would have given, in some cases, neighborhoods to basically, I think you have a 20% threshold is what was proposed of people to vote to basically dissolve their HOA. Yeah. Of course, this would be a big process that wouldn't just happen overnight. But it would give homeowners a chance to have some leverage where a lot of homeowners feel like they don't have any sort of say in what happens. It didn't come across the finish line, though. The Senate, again, was a little resistant in passing this. We think it'll definitely come back up, though, because, this is an issue that so many people are dealing with. Anybody who has an HOA can attest to that. Yeah, and HOAs, of course, have been in focus as we talk about condo reform as well that we've been talking about over recent years. I want to talk about a couple of AI-related bills, if I can. The governor had been hoping for an AI Bill of Rights. Skyler, you've covered his push on AI. That's seen him break quite significantly with the Trump administration and Silicon Valley on his desire for regulation. Where does DeSantis stand on this? And do we think the hesitation in the Florida House could be to do with avoiding conflict with the federal government?
Yeah, this is an interesting issue. And what it's kind of showing is that AI is shaping up to be a big issue in 2028. And, DeSantis certainly has presidential ambitions. So I would expect we're going to hear a lot more about AI, both, the disruption it's causing in people's jobs and, people's utility bills with data centers. And, it absolutely shows a break, whereas the Trump administration has been more receptive to kind of a one federal standard. And, their position is the United States needs to win the AI race. We don't want China winning that race. DeSantis has really emphasized the potential harms that it could inflict to, everyday people. And the House Speaker did say that they were more receptive to Trump's position that this is a federal issue. This isn't something that the state should be handling.
There shouldn't be just that patchwork of rules. Well, Skyler there mentioned data centers, and that brings me on to another AI-related bill that did pass on this issue. Spectrum News has covered this. What does this bill that is going to the governor for his signature require of data center companies, and how does it address the concerns over, I guess, electricity costs for ratepayers?
Yeah, these data centers, they use a lot of resources. And this is one area where we have seen Governor DeSantis support efforts to preserve the environment in other areas, especially dealing with water, which is going to be increasingly more and more of a valuable resource each and every day here in Florida. These data centers, they require a lot of water to cool down all of those processes that are happening here. And so what they wanted to do is basically say, hey, you do have to be responsible for your part and what you use as far as those utilities, not only paying for the utilities, but that electric grid. They use a lot of power. They put a strain on those power systems potentially. And so what this does is it does require them to be responsible for the effect they have on the local communities that they're in, but it fell short the Senate ended up adopting a bill, not their original plan. They wanted, kind of full transparency here. So this bill actually allows those local communities to still sign NDAs with these companies as they're in the process of establishing them. So the public may not know potentially if one of these data centers is going to go in or what the plans are until they're already there. And that's something it kind of fell short of doing what the Senate at least wanted to originally do with these.
Well, as Skyler mentioned, I doubt this is an issue that's going away as AI just proves to be a bigger and bigger part of our lives. Before we wrap up, I did want to mention a bill that we talked about recently here on the program with Joe Mario Pedersen from Central Florida Public Media, the Medical Freedom Bill, which aimed to further the DeSantis administration's targeting of vaccine mandates. That didn't get a hearing in the House, despite passing the Senate. I wonder if we can expect the governor to continue his push on that during his last year in office. It's been a priority for his administration.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he's saying he's going to do. That he said there's more than one way to skin a cat, and he's going to keep pushing for this. And I mean, there are, perhaps ways that they could put this into some budget language or resurrect it in a special sessions. And they also could maybe try to do some things through executive actions as well.
Well, we'll keep our eye on that for sure. You can hear our discussion on the Medical Freedom Bill on our February 18th podcast episode. We'll put up links to the Orlando Sentinel's recent coverage of the legislative session and to Spectrum News Political Connections program, which has done a lot of reporting on Tallahassee as well. It's all in our podcast feed. Show notes, Jeff Allen from Spectrum News and Skyler Swisher from the Orlando Sentinel. Thanks so much for coming in, guys.
So good to be here.
Yeah, really appreciate it. I did want to mention that while the Land Use and Development Bill that we talked about last week on the show did pass, that amendment to make it easier to develop in rural boundaries failed, as did an amendment to soften some of the restrictions passed last year on local government's abilities to regulate development. Check out the podcast feed to hear more on that issue. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Talking Central Florida is a production of the News Collaborative of Central Florida with support from the Orlando Sentinel, the Winter Park Voice, the Central Florida Foundation, and Central Florida Public Media, where the show is recorded. We'll be back with a new episode next Wednesday. Until then, take care and have a great week.